We're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. That's right, you're listening to Coming Out Christian, a podcast about life at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith. This fun, faithful, and sometimes irreverent podcast is a production of Love Boldly, an Ohio-based nonprofit creating spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity. I'm one of your hosts, Siobhan Boyd Nelson, and my co-host is the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp, Executive Director of Love Boldly. So join us, and let's find out who's coming out today. Well, hello there, Ben.
Hello, Siobhan. How are you?
I am doing absolutely wonderfully. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Like we keep saying, even though we're recording this in the past now,
Yes.
This episode is going to be coming out right at the end of November. I'm sorry, right at the end of October, rather. So this will be prime fall weather, which we've established already that I love. So I will be very happy. I also might be attending a retreat when this episode airs, or heading to one.
Oh,
We're still planning that.
I love a fall retreat. You really just can't beat that. Anytime you can just do a nice fire outside, I sure do love a nice outdoor fire.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Well, I got a question for you, Ben, because
Sure.
Audible's having a sale. I love an audiobook. I love a podcast. Audible's having a sale. And I'm thinking about getting some books. I usually only read fiction, but I think I might be ready to dive back into nonfiction. And I was thinking about some books on the Bible and queer identity or sexuality. And I know there are a ton out there. They can be pretty surface. They can be much, much deeper. What's a good one? I know you're Reverend Dr. Ben. I was thinking, who could I ask this question of? Of course, you. Do you have any recommendations?
So I have a few. I think the one that I would point you and others to is there's a little book by the Reverend Dr. Stephen Harper, and I'm forgetting exactly what the book is called, and I'm looking at my bookshelves to see if I can quickly grab it, but I can't find it. But I believe it's something about on love. But if you Google Stephen Harper, you'll find it. Harper is was a conservative minister who has become much more progressive as his theology has evolved. And what he writes this book that's probably only about 100 pages long.
Okay.
But he sets up a biblical case for accepting and including LGBTQIA+ folks. And he makes some really cool and I think really concrete examples for how he reads particularly the book of Genesis. And he's particularly reading Genesis 1, the first creation story. And what he says in it is, God creates spectrums. So God creates night and day, but also creates midnight and twilight and all other times of day. Genesis does not go into God created elephants and giraffes and dogs and cats. It says God created beasts of the sea or beasts of the air or things that walk and crawl on the earth. Actually, if you go through Genesis 1, God doesn't technically create reptiles. They're not in there. They, animals that can live on both the earth and the water aren't technically there.
Yeah.
So, but we accept
amphibians.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But we accept that God created amphibians. So we accept, therefore, that God creates these spectrums. And Harper, therefore, argues that if we accept that God creates spectrums for everything else, then why wouldn't it be that God would create spectrums for humans?
Right.
And so that you would have homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, pansexual, transgender, etc. And it's just it was one of kind of those aha moments when I first read that book. And now I've used it in a few sermons as well. But it's a good starting point. And again, the book is only about 100 pages long. So it's not necessarily a deep theological or biblical dive. It's not something that is going to, go on for pages at length about, different pronunciation marks in Hebrew, or about, deep theological questions in Calvin and in Luther.
Right.
But it's not surface level either.
Okay.
So that would be one I would definitely point folks to. I'd also point folks to any of the books by the Reverend Brandon Robertson. And I admit that Brandon is a friend of mine. He's a coworker, colleague of mine. But he has done a lot of good work that is very pastorally minded and is very much minded on folks who maybe don't have a theological or seminary background.
Okay. Well,
so those would be the two.
Well, that's very helpful. And just a reminder for all of our listeners, Reverend Brandon Robertson was one of our guests during season 1. That was episode 11. So if you haven't listened to that yet, absolutely go listen. And thank you, Ben. Those are amazing recommendations. I have heard the analogy about the creation spectrums, but I did not realize that was the book it was from. So definitely want to pick that one up. Thank you. Oh, I love having smart friends. Okay, let's make another really smart friend. Let's get into today's guest, who is the amazing Bishop Alex D. Byrd. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Bishop Byrd. Bishop Byrd is a compassionate leader whose ministry is grounded in empowering others to succeed. Described as a lifelong churchman, Bishop Byrd works diligently to help pastors create church environments that exhibit the love and holiness of God. He says, the church is ordained by God to be God's ambassador of love in the world. We have not always got that right, but we can. He is the co-pastor with his husband of Living Faith Covenant Church in Dallas, Texas, a church he founded 25 years ago. It is the longest standing open and affirming church in the tradition of the Black church in Texas. He is the author of several Bible studies that challenge the pervasive voice of the church on matters related to the LGBTQIA community, to include biblical defenses for homosexuality and the truth about Sodom and Gomorrah. He currently serves as the Episcopal assistant to Presiding Prelate Dr. Yvette A. Flunder in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. He is married to Prophet Marvin T. Roberts and has 5 beautiful children, 15 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. He completed a Master of Theological Studies degree at Bryd Divinity School. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bishop Byrd. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you all so much for inviting me. I'm so glad to be here.
And would you like to jump in with a recommendation as I'm getting started here, back on my nonfiction journey?
Well, I tell you, there has been so many great books that have been come out in recent times. I am still working on some of the right now I'm doing a study on the historical arguments that have been used both for and against homosexuality in the church. So I'm kind of a little bit dated, but I do. One of my favorite books out of all of them is a book called "What the Bible Says About Homosexuality." I think that was Sylvia Pennington. I believe that is the author. It is an older book, but is a book that begins to utilize some of the different arguments and discourses that were previous to. But adding another stint on it. So it's an easy read book. That's the thing. Right? It's an easy read book. So
wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's dig into it. Let's get started with our first question that we ask all of our guests. What is your testimony? What is your story at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith?
Awesome. So thank you for asking that question, and I'm going to reminisce for a minute.
Oh, lovely.
I was born into an organization called the Church of God in Christ, which is a historically African American church from the Holiness Pentecostal persuasion, and my father was a pastor. Mm-hmm. So I've had a really good opportunity to get involved in the church and really begin to to understand what my place was, because I come from a long line of preachers, right?
Right, right.
So early on, I actually started preaching at the age of 8.
Wow.
And I began preaching, but I was preaching what I had been taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
At 8, you're not doing like really, really strong studies, right? So,
Right, yeah.
so I preached what I'd been taught. And for a long time, even in the early part of that relationship, in the early part of my living, I had a strong relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, I go back to that relationship that I had with God as a child. And I remember some of the things that came out in those conversations, and just really talking to God and everything. And now I'm actually going back to them. So
Wow.
some of the things that I used to ask, because I was a very inquisitive person, some of the things I used to ask God, and I got, people told me something different on the answer. Now I'm going back through and studying for myself and realizing that the
Mm.
original answer was the right answer.
Okay.
Now, as it relates to the intersection between homosexuality and the church, um, I found out pretty early on in life about my attraction to men. Um, Unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not sure which one it is, but my family didn't talk about homosexuality that much, right? It was like the off comments about that person being what do we call it? Funny. We called
Yep.
it funny
Yep.
back then. There was no gay word, and we didn't know anything about gay. We just said they were funny, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I did know about fornication. So, when I got involved in a relationship early on, I really thought that my greatest sin was fornication.
Okay.
I was dragged out of the closet, or traumatically um, pushed out of the closet, if you will,
Yeah.
by a family member who got upset with me and decided that they wanted to tell my mother about the relationship that I was having.
Yeah.
Or had at that point. And my mother began to tell me about all of these scriptures that I have never heard before about how homosexuality was sin. These days, we know those passages as the clobber passages.
Right. Yeah.
So I spent a lot of my teenage years um, really wrestling with the fact of my love for God, my call to preach, my call to be faithful to God, because at that time, I had been reclaimed. And in Kojic Church, you can backslide and then be reclaimed. So I had been reclaimed and really trying to make sense out of all of that. And really trying to learn what my relationship with God was, and knowing that sin could, this is what I knew at the time, that sin could separate me from God.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
did my best. I did my best to live holy according to what I understood holiness was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of those weird childs. Right? The feelings, the attractions never went away, but I was able to live without having acted on them most of the time. Let me just say it like that. Most of the time,
Got
right?
it.
And what I've during that journey, what I found is that God never really talked to me about homosexuality.
Mm.
And all the time that I was getting to know God and getting, studying scriptures, and this is in my teenage years, I had learned how to read and study the scriptures and everything. What God really focused on with me was what it meant to be saved, what it meant for Jesus to come and die a substitutionary death. And I know in theological circles they're arguing that, but I still believe in a substitutionary death, right?
Okay. Yeah.
That Jesus died and paid the penalty, the full penalty for all sin. Now I'm in college now, and I'm looking through all of that, and I read the book of Hebrews. And in one part of the book of Hebrews, it says that just like the sacrifices of old took away the sins of the world, that Jesus now is that sacrifice, and that Jesus is the sacrifice that does not fade away.
Mm.
Jesus is the sacrifice. So no matter what they did, once that in the Old Testament, what they did, the sacrifice covered all of the sins that they had previously committed.
Right.
They didn't have to go back and do anything. They didn't have to, slobber and all that kind of stuff. They didn't have to do all that. It covered the sacrifices for the past. But if Jesus is the sacrifice that doesn't fade away, then no matter what I do, the sacrifice covers it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
both past and future. When I really began to understand that and really began to accept that I could do nothing to earn salvation, I could do nothing to earn the relationship that I have with God, that it was a gift of God, from God through faith, then God started to deal with me with homosexuality.
Okay.
And what God did, I was actually beginning an online ministry. This is back in the days of AOL,
Oh.
the instant messenger,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that. Some of y'all young people don't know nothing about that. Y'all don't know anything about that. But this was back in those days, and we were actually beginning an ex-gay movement. An ex-gay ministry, if you will. And one of the brothers told me that he was disturbed by an article that he was reading. And in that article, the name of the article was Dispelling the Myth. So he sent me the article. I started reading it and I got scared, right? I got scared because at this point, I had learned exegetical tools. I had learned how to really go into scripture and understand and tease out the things that were said and were not said. And while I was reading this text, I was understanding that these were the same tools that I had been taught to use, and that the arguments were sound arguments. So you know what I did, man? I stopped reading it, got scared, and went on a fast. As a good Pentecostal does, right? Because sometimes in our movement, we were so scared of going to hell, right?
Right.
That we believed that we could be deceived, right? And so I didn't want to be deceived, and so I needed to fast. I needed to pray and make sure that I was in the right place to hear what God had to say, right? About a month later, I picked up the article again, and that article freed me. It freed me to understand that I was not a sinner because of my sexual or affectional orientation, that I was not an abomination. And at that time, it took years of really living into that for me to understand that in actuality, my sexuality is a gift from God.
Right.
That God can be expressed in the world. It is actually a gift, and that gift comes with a purpose. So that's where I am right now.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I love the way you put that it is a gift, and it is a gift with a purpose. Tell us about that purpose. What is that? What is the gift of this, of our other sexual orientation or sexual affection? I like the way you say that, affectional orientation. What is that gift, and what is its purpose?
The purpose is being really fulfilled more now than before. But the original purpose that I saw was that I now have an opportunity to touch people's lives who were in bondage by the idea that God created them to destroy them. Right?
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to talk to people who had given up on church per se, but had not given up on God, but they still had this disconnect between them and God, because they came to God like a puppy with a tail, that tucked in tail, right? They came to God in a way that was so inferior, right?
Right.
Because they felt the weight of what they understood to be sin in the presence of God. And the gift at that point was to really begin to share this message about salvation, this message that Christ did everything to make sure that you could come to the throne of grace boldly, right? So let's get it. Sin is not the issue. Sin
Okay.
is not an issue, right? And so let's get that off the table so that we can deal with the real issue. And the real issue is how you are accepting the world's view of who you are and internalizing that so that it covers and takes away that purpose that God has within you, the ability to be a unique expression of God in the earth. That's the gift that God has given you. And even and that expression includes that sexual expression as well.
Right.
I get in trouble sometimes, but it includes that.
It does. It does. No, that is absolutely beautiful. And I see here now you've been a pastor for so long. You've had this church for 25 years, creating this space,
Yes.
trying to free people from this bondage. And this might be a really big question, so I apologize, but what have you learned? What have you learned over that 25 years, particularly right now? Because you've seen a lot of change over that 25
Oh,
years
yes.
in the way that society and even more so the church approaches the question of sexual orientation and
True.
the church's role in that question even, and it's particularly in Texas. So
Oh, my God, yes.
yeah. So what if you can distill, and of course this won't be everything you've learned, what are some of the big things that you've learned over those 25 years?
To answer that question, I would like to really go into what I believe that purpose is for now,
Okay.
because that includes what I've learned over those years. Because
Yeah.
when we first started into this, and I call it the affirming movement, there has been a movement that God has been doing all across the country, right? In every area of life, really a movement of freedom and liberation. But in that affirming movement, one of the first things that we really pushed forward was the ability to own ourselves, if you will, and validate ourselves. But what happened during that time is, in our validation of ourselves and our opening up ourselves to a spiritual relationship with God, we began to see God in a different light. We begin to see God as the God who is, and now if I can borrow from the United Church of Christ, the God that is still speaking, right? We
Yes,
we
yes.
we begin to see that this God that we're in relationship actually does want to have an intimate and personal relationship with us, and that we are not only valued, but we are an intricate part of God's creation.
Right. Yeah.
What we learned in the practice of that, though, is how many other people need to hear that message.
Okay. Yeah.
How many people who are not gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, all of those, right? We've learned that God put us in a wilderness for a period of time to give us and share with us who God was, so that we can come back to the greater community and say to the greater community, I know something about God and I can share something about God with you. And a lot of it these days has a lot to do with how we are living. how we're living in the world, this justice piece is an important part of our understanding who God is in us and who God is through us. We're able now not just to fight for our own freedoms, right? But we have tools now that we're able to fight for the freedoms of the woman who has children who are raising, the grandmother who is raising other children, right?
Mm-hmm.
The woman who, particularly in, I think it's in Texas somewhere, but the woman who is being used as a human incubator so that her child can be born, but she is brain dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
These kind of injustices that come against the image of God. Now we have tools. We are able to be a Christian voice in a social structure where the pervasive Christian voice is the voice of damnation and judgment. We are able to bring liberation. We are able to bring hope. We are able to bring self-esteem. We're able to bring that kind of liberation because of the things that we went through, and we were sure that we were not going to give up.
That's right.
That's what we learned. That's what we learned. And we're ready to share it.
That is amazing. And that sounds familiar. What I'm hearing from a number of different folks who are leading churches, leading open and affirming churches are, no, we've got the tools. We know how to get through, and we know how to usher in liberation and how to be a conduit for liberation. Now, you talked about the two voices of the church, though, because there is this voice of liberation, and then there's this voice of damnation. And when I'm looking, and it's a little bit difficult for me because I live a very particular type of life where most of my friends are from the queer community, and then I've got even more friends who are queer and of faith, so I even have a queer of faith community.
Okay.
I have to remember sometimes, not everybody has that. That isn't necessarily normal. How do we get there? What is that path to becoming the dominant voice, the Christian voice of liberation, becoming the dominant voice, and for this to get out there? You've been doing it for 25 years. I'm guessing you've been trying to reach people a number of different ways. How are you reaching people? How's your church reaching people?
Well, our church is reaching people by certainly we're still doing Bible studies in person and online. What the pandemic did for us is it branched us out because we're kind of traditional in our methods, even though we think we're progressive. We're kind of traditional in our message, but the pandemic forced us to get out there on the internet. And broaden the scope of the hearers of the message. So we do our Bible studies. We are really more focused on making sure that the human necessities are met so that the gospel can be heard, right? So we're opening up our hot meals feeding program for our neighborhood. Our church is in a neighborhood that is one of the top food insecure neighborhoods in the United States, right?
Oh my.
And so we are working to build that program and to do that without requiring some kind of religious actions on the other person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We're there to serve. We're there to minister. We're there to feed. If God opens up the opportunity, we're there to evangelize. We're there to share the work. But those two for us are separate. We can be God in the earth without having to preach God in the earth. And we can preach God in the earth without being God in the earth, right? So we have to be able to do both. And we have to be able to discern which is the right time. Now, our hopes is that because of that connection, because we are ministering to the need, that the door will be open. The door will be open, and we'll be able to address things with the tools that we have now. Well, address things that are causing others to feel insecure in the society in which we live.
That's beautiful. Ben, I don't want to take up all of Bishop Byrd's time. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have one that kind of follows from what you just asked, Siobhan. And that's the piece that, Bishop Byrd, you're, as much as you are a pastor and you're co-leading a church in a particular place, you're also co-leading I still can't decide if TFAM folks are going to be mad at me for saying denomination, but let's face it, TFAM is basically a denomination in everything but name. Or at least most things.
I'll accept that. Yeah.
Okay. I know I'm going to get in trouble with a few TFAM folks. But I mean, you are also leading this fellowship, this denomination that is at that intersection and very grounded at the intersection of racial identities, multiple racial identities,
Yes,
and the LGBTQ community and the church. And I think, even though I'm new to TFAM, I definitely experienced the fact that the Midwest region, for example, took a photo of convocation, and someone looked around and said, we have like 14 denominations among the 16 of us.
Yeah.
We have these different traditions and whatnot. So, we're in this really kind of, frankly, awesome kind of big tent, but again, very grounded in some of our racial identities as well as our very clear LGBTQ identity. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it's like, both working in that and also growing it, making it? I think one thing I heard from a lot of folks at TFAM was, in years past, this has been a little bit more kind of fly by the seat of our pants, but we're doing more formal structures. And I know you have really been involved in that. So I just wonder if you can comment someone being in that kind of national, even international leadership role.
Good. Thank you so much for that and asking. I love talking about the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, just because that is the place where it seemed like we all just kind of came together. I mean, like I said, there were ministries popping up everywhere along that time, but God sent us to the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. My first experience, and this is a precursor to your question. My first experience with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, I came in, I was actually starting a denomination. Right? And I came in, and there was this word that I kept hearing from the different speakers about the stretching. Before that conference was over, I was like really, really in tears because I was being stretched. I was being stretched by some of the bondages or old tapes, right, that caused me to be judgmental on so many different levels, right? I was still in bondage to that. And so I saw things. I saw God moving in people that God shouldn't move in. Right? I saw the Spirit of God showing up in ways that I was totally against, right? And so I left there crying, and almost every year since then, it's been more of a stretch. It's been a pulling away from what we consider to be the image of God, or what is God, right? So Ben, I think that in leading that organization, we have tried, Bishop Flunder, we follow in her footsteps, but she's really tried to keep us open to the stretching, open to whatever it is that God wants to do. And that's why we have a culmination of so many diverse identities, diverse people in our organization. And stretching is hard.
It is. It is. It doesn't
It
always feel good.
No, it doesn't. And it doesn't come without conflict either.
Right.
It doesn't come without conflict. So what we're learning to do even more is we're learning how to allow that conflict to be a part of that process.
Mm.
Learning how to accept it for where we are. We're learning how to hold on to our foundations as we can and let go of the things that need to be let go. And thank God, Ben, that God didn't do all of that at one time. I could not imagine if I would be with the fellowship, if I had to be where I am now when I first came to the fellowship. I can't imagine, because something would have said, that's too much. I can't handle it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So God is continually expanding the table. And it seems like when we think that the table has been expanded enough, then God does something else.
Yeah.
Right. So we're working to create those spaces where everyone can be a part, be a vital part of the organization as well as the movement, because there is a movement that is above TFAM, because God's been doing this work for a long time, right?
Right.
So we really want to be a part of that.
That's beautiful. That's such a great way to describe that. And I think that what folks are going to hear over this season is a number of folks talking about stretching and
Yeah.
moving away from where you were and evolving theologies, and that idea of evolving theology. And I just want to say, and Ben, this might be the same, especially Roman Catholic tradition. I mean, there's so much tradition. There's so many of our denominations, whether they're majority white, majority black, whatever tradition, so much of religious faith and faith practice is steeped in a reverence for tradition and what has come before, which often I think makes Christians, particularly those of us who grew up in the church with parents and grandparents, less stretchable, right? Like we don't have as much bend in our bodies to do that stretching. And what I found is that it's the people who don't come from a church tradition, the people that we were taught to be wary of, right? The people who are bringing different traditions, the people who are bringing bits of Hindu and Buddhism and all these other things, they're bringing them to us, and we were taught to see them as heretical and blasphemous and bad, and to hold tight, right, to God's unchanging hand. And
Right.
I think that gives us a little bit of, I think we hear that wrong, right? God's hand is unchanging. That's fine. That doesn't mean we don't change. Doesn't mean that we don't evolve.
Right.
How is your church? And so you've got a church that I guess had a bunch of people who came from church. And if you're stretching as the pastor, you're asking your congregation to stretch with you.
Absolutely. And fortunately, there are those that can do that stretch with us. There are those that can, that are so connected to the heart of God for themselves that they are submitted to whatever it is that God wants to do. Like I said, it's not an easy thing, because there are reasons why, and I'm going to go way back. There are reasons why I believe that women should not wear pants, right?
Right.
There are reasons why that red was not the color for a woman to wear. And I really believe that holiness was mostly for women, because there was not so many so many things that you could do wrong as a man. But there were reasons, right? And I could explain those reasons. It is in the stretching when we really begin to allow ourselves to challenge those reasons.
Yeah. That
we're able to see, well, what is the heart of God? So my thing for those that are stretching is, look, I want you to hold on to what you got. This is an old song in our church. Hold on to what you got and ask the Lord for more, right?
Okay.
So hold on to what you got, but don't be willing that when it no longer makes sense, discard it. when it no longer makes sense. See, I don't think that tradition is bad.
Right.
I think that tradition is important. Tradition is designed to help us remember something that is important. Communally remember something that's important. What happens, though, is when tradition loses its purpose,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes oppression.
Right. Yeah.
When you are still trying to hold on to a tradition that you don't even believe in anymore, then you become oppressed, because now you cannot move forward. You're stuck and you don't even believe what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when that, it's hard for people who have especially people who come from a biblical literalist view.
Yeah.
As much as you can be a biblical literist, I'll have to say that. But it's hard for us to make that stretch and do more or really challenge those years of tradition. So that's why it's important for God to bring in people who are from other religions
Yes.
and people with no religions, right?
Right.
To
Right.
come back and ask us, why are we doing this? And we have to be submitted enough to the process that we don't get mad when they ask, right?
Right.
But we ask ourselves the same thing. Why are we doing this? And one of the principles of our church is that we are a new thinking church. And I teach the people in our new member orientation, that means we question everything.
Okay.
We
I love it.
question everything. If it's said from the pulpit and the pastor said it, we gonna question it.
Mm-hmm.
And they have questioned everything. And it has been a great growing experience, not just for the members, but also for us as leaders, for my husband and I as leaders. We have been challenged even in our own ministry to grow because we question everything. And we're not afraid that when it no longer makes sense, we're not afraid to let it go.
Yeah.
Let it go.
That is beautiful. That is, I think I'm just going to end us there, because that is a wonderful note to end on. Such good words for us as we are moving forward and being challenged absolutely every day. Thank you so much for Bishop Byrd for sharing with us and sharing so much about your own story and your own journey as a pastor and a leader of a congregation. It has been so insightful.
Thank you all so much. Ben, I say to you again, wholeheartedly, welcome to the fellowship.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Siobhan, we're going to get you in too. So just so you know.
We've been trying to work on her for both seminary and for TFAM.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I see in the spirit it's going to happen. All right.
I have felt such a warm welcome from TFAM, and it's literally just been through the individuals. So amazing, absolutely amazing. We're going to go into our two segments now. The first one is our query of the day. And, we ended on such a great note about stretching and questioning and challenging. And so I'm going to put this, it's going to be a little bit of an open-ended question, but what have you been stretched? What has been stretching for you? What are you questioning? What has been questioned? If there was a big question or a big stretch that you're like, that was it. That was the big one that just let everything else loose. What was that for you? Ben, do you have something that comes to mind?
Yeah, so actually I've been kind of sitting on one, and I was thinking that if we didn't get here somehow naturally, I was going to at least text Bishop Byrd afterwards and say this. But honestly, it was the recent TFAM convocation. So for our listeners who may not know, the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries every other year has a convocation, a gathering of TFAM folks, clergy, bishops, everyone. And we just did this at the beginning of July in Atlanta. And, honestly, there were a lot of firsts going on for me. I was ordained by TFAM there. There was a lot of good. There was a lot of joyous moments. But as some of our more regular listeners know, I come from a Catholic background. I'm still, I'd like to think I'm kind of a Pentecostal in training. There are things I love. There's stuff that I'm still learning about and getting used to. But there were also, to be very honest, there were also a lot of moments. There were literal moments when I was sitting in TFAM sometimes in a presentation, sometimes in worship, and thinking, I can't do this. These are not my people. I can't do this. And some of that was tradition. Some of that was liturgical. To be very honest, some of that was also some laden white guilt, white supremacy, white bullshit stuff that I thought I had unlearned, but I hadn't. And I mean, I knew going into TFAM that TFAM was a predominantly Black African-American space, but there were still some moments where that awful white supremacy that is still living inside some part of my brain reared its ugly head. And I was like, what am I doing here? Should I be here? Both on the white guilt side of that, of should I be here as a white person? Is this like a Black space only? And also, what am I doing here as a white person? These are some weird thoughts that I didn't think I'd have at 38 years old. So there were actual moments where I thought, no, I'm going to go back to my room. I'm going to pack up and I'm getting on the first flight out of here. And I'm so happy that I didn't give in to that each time I was like, no, I need to stay, and because TFAM is the fam and family part of that is really, really real in TFAM. And I made so many cool friends and made so many great connections. So, but that was definitely many moments of stretching, of just kind of being like, this is really pulling me in ways that I have not been pulled recently, and pulled me in ways that that I really had to sit there. I'm still processing. I've been preparing this like big email to send to Bishop Byrd, or not Bishop Byrd, Bishop Wolf, about what I experienced, what I want to do, blah blah blah. And 2 months out, I'm still trying to figure that one out. But that was definitely, and I love Bishop Byrd, the way that you put that as moments of stretching, because that's definitely what it was.
Wow, Ben, thank you so much for sharing. That's amazing. And yes, the convocation in Atlanta sounded amazing. I had total FOMO whenever Ben texted me from there. So expect to see me at a future one, probably. Bishop Byrd, what are you questioning or stretching on right now?
Yeah, so this is personal and intimate, but I am stretching on letting prophecy go. So if my birth was prophesied before my mother got pregnant with me. The prophet came back when she got pregnant with me. And after I was born, I think around 8 or some early years, the prophet came back and reiterated the prophecy, right? And much of my life has been centered around making sure I live up to the prophecy.
Oh, yeah.
And what I'm being stretched with now is, what if that doesn't ever come to pass, right? I can't make it come to pass, right? So my stretching is, I have some decisions about the way I want to live my life too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And so letting go of that's been hanging over my head, and saying to God, if this is what you're going to do, you go ahead and do it, right? But I'm not going to make it happen. I'm not going to push for it to happen. You know what you want to do. So that's been the stretch for me in this time right now.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is, I think that is helpful for folks because so many of us are, even if it's not a prophecy, if it's a dream that our parents or our grandparents had, or an expectation, so many of us are still trying to live up to that instead of living our own lives and living them for ourselves. Yeah. I would say that my stretch right now, and it's actually a stretch that's been going on for probably 30 years. And I'm going to say this stretch started when I first heard a calling from God, and that was going to be around the age of 16. And one of the first things, and I came back to God with a lot of buts, because that was my favorite word as a teenager. And I said, "But God, I'm a woman." And I say that I think that was one of my first buts, because I was raised in a holiness Pentecostal church, and women did not speak in church. Women did not wear pants. Women did not wear makeup. Women did not wear earrings. You wore a hat, and don't start competing with the hats, right? And there were particular roles for women that women could have. You could tarry at the altar, like my great grandmother. My great grandmother tarried at the altar for 60 years with different people. You could be a church mother. You could be a pastor's wife, right? You could be the first lady, but there was no space for women to actually lead in non all female spaces. And I am such a traditionalist, and I'm going to say that if folks know me, I'm a traditional, a very progressive queer Black woman who is very traditional. And this is still one of those stretches that I'm doing, where I am having to go back. I listened to a podcast, and it was about Adam and Eve, and I began thinking very deeply about the way that female identity, not even queer identity, but female identity, has been presented to me throughout my religious and Christian education, and how damaging that has been, but how foundational it is to so much that I believe about the world and myself. And so I am beginning to do a very intentional stretch. I was always, female empowerment. Oh yeah, girls can do anything. Girls can be a boss, girl boss, whatever. But not within the church. It had a stopping place that was secular. You can be a girl boss, but it stopped at the church door. And now my stretch is really going in and relearning and becoming reacquainted with the Bible and the stories of the Bible from a feminist, womanist perspective, and not, and it all starts with no longer seeing Eve as the villain, right? As the original villain. And it's tough. It's tough to excavate that stuff that's been in there for a while. And like you said, it is freeing, it is liberating, and it's not just for me. It is not just for me. So
Absolutely.
thank you both for sharing. I think this has been really great, and I want everyone to get on Instagram. Let us know, get in the chat, leave us comments. Let us know what you are questioning, what you are stretching on, what you have questioned recently, and what new things you have learned, what liberation you have found through your questioning and through your stretching, so that we can all be liberated with you. All right, now it's time for our moment in queer Christian history. This is when Ben reminds us that not only have we always been here, we've always been here in the church. Reverend Dr. Ben?
Well, I chose one for today that is that I had never heard of until about 2 days ago. So this is a kind of new fact for me as well. But there was a minister by the name of the Reverend John Church. Very apt, name for a minister. He lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s in England. And he is acknowledged, at least in Great Britain, as the first openly gay ordained minister, at least in that country, possibly anywhere. He was ordained in September of 1807. He was definitely someone who I can't decide on the best word to use here, but he was married to a woman, had children, but was often associated with the kind of underground LGBT, or really gay men culture in London at the time. He was known to frequent this pub called the White Swan, which was well known as, quote unquote, gay bar, where he would perform what at the time were called mock marriage ceremonies, but were acknowledged by historians to be in everything but legality, same-sex marriages. Again, like we talk about any time when we're talking about folks being acknowledged as LGBTQ prior to about the mid 1800s or later, we have to be careful about a bit of applying our own ideas of what makes someone queer to that time period. Church was definitely reviled, both in the press and in his own church, for his connections with these gay men. So it may be that people called him gay, even though he wasn't, and were doing so in a negative context. But again, a number of historians have now consider him to be at least the first openly gay ordained Christian minister in England, if not the rest of the world.
Wow, we keep learning more, and I love it, love it, love it, especially when folks are willing to reread and reconsider. Again, that questioning, and we're seeing more and more historians go back and do that and question the way that we read things and the biases that we had in years past. So thank you so much for sharing, Ben. Well, that brings us to the end of another wonderful episode. I want to say thank you again to Bishop Byrd. Is there anything that you would like to share with our audience? Any events, social media that you'd like to plug?
Well, I would like to plug the fact that we are the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries is having a leadership conference in 2026. Don't have the dates and stuff just yet. We're still working on that, but it's going to be in South Carolina.
Ooh.
So anybody that's in South Carolina, come. You can get more information from us. So we'll keep you posted on that. And then in 2027. We'll have another Holy Convocation, which is the general convocation for everyone. We'll be ordaining some more people. So if you are interested in being ordained, you can go to a website that's radicallyinclusive.com/join-us. radicallyinclusive.com/join-us.
Wonderful. I am going to encourage everyone to check out that website, actually, and get more information on TFAM and the wonderful things that they are doing there. Ben, any announcements from Love Boldly?
Hopefully, by the time this episode airs, we will have programs set for November and December or more in the future. Unfortunately, at the time that we're recording this episode, we don't have any plans for programs in those 2 months, but definitely stay tuned to our website, loveboldly.net. All of our events, all of our resources, links to this podcast, to some of our other videos, pre-recorded stuff, are all available on our website.
Oh, amazing. All right, folks. Remember, please, if you are enjoying the podcast, like, subscribe, tell a friend of a friend. Let everybody know that this is out here. There's a place for them here. And we will see you next Sunday on Coming Out Christian.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope this conversation encouraged you, challenged you, and maybe just helped you feel a little less alone on your journey. If this podcast has been meaningful to you, would you consider supporting the work of Love Boldly? Love Boldly's mission is to create spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity, and your donation helps make conversations like this one possible. You can give at www.loveboldly.net/donate. That's www.loveboldly.net/donate. Want to stay connected with the podcast? Follow us on Instagram at comingoutchristian_podcast for updates, resources, and community. Until next time, remember that you can be queer and Christian and queer.